All right, well, good morning and welcome to our Tag Your IT webinar. We put this webinar together to help out with our customers with the IT specific tasks that relate to Mastercam. We do have a lot to go over today, but I think this won't take the full 2 hours that was scheduled. Hopefully we can get everyone back to work in a reasonable amount of time. This slide sort of gives an outline of what we're going to talk about today, but what is not here is the introduction of our support team. Jim Varco has been heading up the support team at MCAM Northwest for 12 years, and if you've been our customer for longer than a week, you've probably worked with him at some point. Jim's a great guy who can run Mastercam with the best of them. We also have Jeff Phoenix, who joined the MCAM team as an applications engineer back in September 2021. Jeff's been using Mastercam for a few years now, and he's been a great addition to our support team. Finally, my name's John Stauffer. I'm also an applications engineer here, and I've been using Mastercam for a few years as well. If you do end up contacting us for support, you're most likely going to get Jeff or Jim, and I will come out to help sometimes. I want to thank Jim for putting together the majority of this webinar. It was a lot of work. There are a lot of slides and a lot of information to go over today, and he put together the majority of this, so thank you, Jim. So with that out of the way, let's get started. The first thing I wanted to note was the resources that are available to you as a Mastercam customer. I've added some links here that you can check out, and I'm going to have Jeff add those to the chat panel as well, so that you don't have to copy them down. These resources are great for both Mastercam programmers and IT professionals who are working with Mastercam. I would recommend that you bookmark these sites so that they are ready to go for you. Also, if there's a direct link for anything that we're talking about today, we have added a QR code. So you can screenshot these slides if you like, or just scan the QR codes with your phone or tablet as we go if you want to open those up for reference. We have the Mastercam forum, which is just a forum that's all about Mastercam, and it's on mastercam.com. That's a great place to check to see what other people are posting about, people's solutions that they come up with for complex problems. It's where people post about, things that have happened to them and what they experienced. And it's also a good place to post about updates or upgrades that you want made to the software. That's a place that CNC, the developers of Mastercam, they do look there to see what people are looking for. So that is a good resource there. There's also the Mastercam knowledge base, which is a place where Mastercam will actually post articles about known support issues and the fixes that they have for those things. So you might check that out if you're having some kind of an issue with Mastercam. You may find an answer there. Or if you end up calling us for support, sometimes we'll end up responding with a link to a knowledge base article that covers that. There's also streamingteacher.com, which is a Mastercam training resource. You can create a free account on streamingteacher.com, and that covers the basics of design, mill, and lathe programming. It also covers the technical support section. So if you are IT only, it's still a good idea to get an account here because you will have access to several videos that can help you with any potential support issues. That library is constantly growing. We're adding more to it all the time, so keep an eye out for that as well. The Mastercam Administrator's Guide is a PDF that installs with Mastercam. You can find that under C, Program Files, Mastercam, and then the Documentation folder. And finally, you have us, MCAM Northwest. We are your local reseller for your local support. You can email us at support@mcamnw.com or give us a call at 503-653-5332. We're open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific time. All right, so with that out of the way, let's chat a little bit about system requirements for Mastercam. This is a topic that we think is important to chat about because we have a lot of people we've seen in the past trying to run Mastercam on computers that are just a little too subpar. Mastercam is a fairly resource-intensive application, and so you do need the hardware to back that up. This chart was provided by CNC Software, so this is their minimum and recommended specs. However, in our experience, this is what this chart should actually look like. That minimum chart is not really enough for anyone who spends a reasonable amount of their time programming. It's just not enough horsepower. So really the recommended chart here is the one that we consider minimum for anyone who is primarily a programmer, or at least spending a good chunk of their time programming. We did have a question earlier about the Windows 11. So as far as the operating system, it is recommended that you run Windows 10 Professional. And at this time, Windows 11 is not supported. There are some reports of people using it and seems to be working, but at this time there isn't enough testing done by CNC to say that they can actually support it. So we would recommend not doing that as of right now. However, Tim, the owner of MCAM, he actually told me that he's going to be guinea pigging Windows 11 pretty soon here. So we'll see how that goes. But all in all, it's probably best to wait until we have official word from CNC that Windows 11 is supported. As far as the processors concerned, an Intel i7 or i9 is really the way to go here. The Xeon processors, they can work, but according to Jim and his experience, they are probably not the best suited for Mastercam. So really sticking with a higher end i7 or i9 processor is going to be giving you the best performance. 32 gigs of RAM is good. That's going to be enough for most people. Not a lot of people are going to have files that really benefit from having more than that, unless you're running some very large and very complex parts, assemblies, multiple machine groups, and things like that. The video card, we're going to skip that for now. We want to talk about that specifically in a couple of slides. Monitors, it's good to have dual monitors. It's very helpful for programming. We do recommend sticking with a 1080p resolution monitor, as the higher resolutions, really all you're doing is pushing extra pixels and making your computer work harder. It's not really going to help Mastercam at all. Solid state drives or M.2 NVMe drives are going to be faster than solid drives, and then or hardware drives, hard disks. I never know what to call them anymore. I don't use them. And then also a 3D connection mouse is really helpful for programmers, especially if they're working in parts on multi-axis machinery and they frequently need different views. So that's a welcome upgrade for most programmers after the initial learning curve, of course. If you are unfamiliar with your system and you would like to get an idea of whether or not the system is ready to go for Mastercam, you can get the Mastercam System Inspector, which is available at the link there. Jeff can put that in the chat as well. Essentially, this tool will read your system and make sure you're good to go. When you do download that, you're going to extract from the zip into a folder and then run the utility. You'll want to click these in order. Let me get my laser pointer out. You'll want to click System Info first, then Analyze, then Create Report. This may take a few minutes, so please be patient while it's doing what it's doing. Again, if you have questions at any time, go ahead and enter those into the Q&A panel, and we have a couple people here that can answer questions for you. Video cards. So we wanted to talk about this specifically because in the recommended chart, it lists the NVIDIA Quadro, the AMD FirePro, and Radeon Pro cards. And so all of these are, Pro CAD cards. And the question is, do you really need that? And the answer to that is probably not. In our experience, the Pro card has no discernible performance improvement over even a gaming card. It's really not a big deal. It's not the same as SolidWorks, which can really take advantage of that type of card. So you don't really need it. I think that Mastercam likes to promote those because of the certified drivers. But in the end, as far as performance goes, the gaming cards seem to be just fine. The main thing is making sure that the graphics card does support OpenGL 3.2 and OpenCL 1.2. That is required. You definitely need those to have good performance in Mastercam. Additionally, what level of graphics card you need will probably depend on what kind of programming the programmer is doing. If they're basically just working on 3-axis machines and using simple verify, it's not likely that they actually need a very high-end card. They could probably get away with something that's fairly budget, and it should be okay. The flip side of that is if you have someone who's doing complex multi-axis programming with full simulation or mil-turn with simulation, that's where you're going to want a more powerful graphics card to make sure everything can run smoothly. It's also important to make sure that the graphics drivers are up to date, and always make sure to get those from the vendors themselves and not using Windows Update. The ones from the vendors are definitely better. However, it's not something that you need to keep up to date all the time. You can probably update it every time you get a new version of Mastercam, and that would be fine. Especially if you're using the gaming cards, you know, they update those drivers for games, and so it's not really going to make an impact in Mastercam in general. There is an article here for enabling the dedicated graphics for Mastercam. And this is for systems that have a hybrid system where you have a dedicated graphics card, but you also have onboard graphics or CPU graphics. And so you'll want to make sure that you go into the settings for that and set Mastercam to always use the graphics card. In some systems, it may default to using onboard graphics instead, and you're going to end up with some performance issues and graphical funniness. All right, so next up we have Mastercam.com. If you are using Mastercam, whether you're a programmer or an IT, it's a good idea to have a registered Mastercam.com account. This gives you access to a lot of the downloads that are available. Registering for an account is a fairly straightforward process. It's basically like any other website. You go up to the login button near the top, and then you can create one here if you don't have one, or log in here. There's also a link to a streaming teacher lesson on how to create a Mastercam.com account if you'd like some help with that. So next up, we can download the installer. Once we're logged in, the main page of Mastercam.com will show this thing for download now for the latest version. However, before we get too far into this, I want to point out that if you're planning on running your Mastercam licensing over a network with a NetHasp or a network software license, you do not need to install Mastercam on your server. We're going to cover that in a bit. These steps are only for workstations where end users will program in Mastercam. Next, we need to select the format that we want to install and download. We have 3 options here for Mastercam, and in this case it's 2022. We have it for SolidWorks, and we have the demo/HLE. And although there is an option here to download Mastercam for SolidWorks, and that may seem tempting if you have a programmer who also uses SolidWorks for modeling, we do not recommend using Mastercam for SolidWorks. When you run Mastercam for SolidWorks, it takes much more processing power to run because you're essentially trying to split 2 system-intensive programs on a single workstation. You should get much better performance by running these applications separately. Mastercam also has its own CAD suite built in, and it's quite capable of making changes to models down the line if needed for programming or making entire parts. Mastercam has tools available to check for any changes made to solid files. So if something has been updated since the last time the programmer opened the file in Mastercam, they can be notified, and they'll be able to adjust their program based on the new model rather than having to rewrite the entire program. There's also an option for the demo/HLE version of the program. This is generally for practice and training without having to purchase a license. You can also use the HLE to evaluate licenses that you don't own, which is nice because it doesn't lock you into an evaluation period. When you download the HLE, it's actually the exact same program as standard Mastercam. It simply uses a different license type to activate the HLE mode. And in that mode, Mastercam will not post code, and it will not be able to save in a standard Mastercam file format. However, the HLE can be used to export STL and 3MF files for 3D printing, which is pretty neat. We're not going to go over how to get the HLE licensing here, But if you're interested in getting an HLE license for evaluation purposes, or if you want to use our benchmark file and you don't have the required licensing, there is a QR code on screen you can watch, and you can watch a video on Streaming Teacher that shows you how to get the HLE program and the licensing for it. So once we've downloaded that installer and launch it, actually, before we launch it, we really should make sure we take a couple of precautions. Make sure that you can back up the system if that's an option for you, or at least we can create a restore point just to have something to go back to. Once you're ready, go ahead and launch that installer. You're first going to get a window for selecting your language, and then you get this screen here. If you don't want to configure this, you don't have to. You can just click Next. But there are some options within configuration that I'd like to talk about. So let's cover this first. So here you can select between inch and metric profiles. You will not be limited to either setting once Mastercam is installed. It's just setting the default configuration in Mastercam. So that's what Mastercam will start up with whenever you open it. Most people here will probably set this to inch, but have a conversation with your programmers if you're not certain. We would recommend leaving the second setting to all users, and that is because down the line, if there are issues where our support team gets involved, we may ask you to try creating a new Windows login to test a problem. If you have this set to only for me, this gets a little more complicated because then you basically have to reinstall Mastercam just to test that out. It's easy enough for other users to simply ignore Mastercam if they don't need it. Then there's the shared defaults folder. The location that is preset here should just be left to default. If you do want to run shared files such as posts and tool libraries over a network, that's fine, and we are going to address that a little bit later. And the reasoning for this is that the Mastercam installer does not support mapped drives, and it has a hard time with UNC paths. So we can save you some trouble, and we can also save some trouble for ourselves in future support calls by just sticking with defaults for now. After you continue through that screen, you'll get the license agreement, so you'll just have to accept that. Click Next, and then Mastercam will start installing. You'll get a progress bar down here and a list of what is being installed. And finally, here's your dialog for when it's finished. You're going to want to start Mastercam at least once so it can finish that process. However, if you don't have your licensing installed yet, then it's not quite time to start Mastercam. Mastercam does support silent installation, and there is information on this in this knowledge base article, or you can scan the QR code here. Next up, we have updates. It is important to run your Mastercam installation up to date. It helps Mastercam run smoothly. Mastercam generally releases about 3 updates per version, so it's not something you have to do weekly or anything like that. New versions drop in June. Update 1 is usually between August and September. Update 2 is usually November, December, and Update 3 is January or February. This is just a generalization. Times may vary. There are 2 ways to get updates installed for Mastercam. The first way is through Mastercam itself, and the other way is to download them from mastercam.com. We're going to start with how to do it in Mastercam. This method is preferred when you only need to update 1 or 2 computers. So from Mastercam, we would go to the File menu, then Help, right down here, and click on Check for Updates. You'll get a pop-up window, and click the Check Now button. If it does find an update, you'll get this new pop-up window. You will want to close Mastercam if you get this window, and that will not close this window. It will stay open. We do need Mastercam closed down in order to install the update. Once you click Install, you'll get a window saying it's downloading, and then you'll get the patch installer here. So once you click through that screen, this will give you a warning screen here if you did not close Mastercam. And after you're past this screen, you should just get to this progress bar here, and that will update as it's installing. Once it's finished, you'll get this screen here saying that it has been completed, and you can click Finish. Depending on the update, there are sometimes where you need to restart the system. So either restart it now or later. It's up to you. Just make sure that you restart it before launching Mastercam again. You will have to repeat this process until there's no more updates. And there is a way for you to actually tell which update you're currently on. So I was going to go ahead and show you that. So in Mastercam, we can go to File, and then Help, and then go to About Mastercam. And up here, it'll show you which update you're on. So I'm on update 3.1, which is a special update that was only for Milturn customers, really. So anyways, if you look at this and you see you're on update 1 and they're up to update 3, well, then you're going to need to run that a couple of times. Alternatively, you can download the updates from mastercam.com. This is helpful if you're updating several computers. You can just save these exe files to a flash drive and then walk it around to the different computers. It's a little easier than downloading them separately for each workstation. You can find those updates at mastercam.com. Once you're logged in, go to the downloads here and go to Mastercam. And you'll get a list of the updates that are available. Again, these updates are not cumulative, so you will need to download these individually and make sure that you run them in order. So let's talk about the shared folder. The shared folder contains all of the files that might be used on multiple systems. Most commonly, this is going to be post files, tool libraries, and simulators. The default location for this is going to be the same location that we saw in the install. C, users, public, documents, shared Mastercam, and whatever version you're currently on. So we can move these files to a network location to make it easier to share between programmers and make sure everyone's playing with the same toys rather than having several copies of the same thing in several locations. So this is really good for programming teams, especially when they're programming the same machines. You may have 4 programmers and 30 machines, but half of those machines might all be the same model. And so they're all running off of the same post. There's no point in having that post separated in multiple locations when one will do the job. So in order to change this, we're going to, in Mastercam, go to File, down to Configuration here. And then in this window, we are going to click on Files in the list on the left. And then we find the Shared Mastercam folder under the Data Paths section. When you click on it, it will show you the current location of that folder. So if we are going to change this to a network location, we're going to click on this button just off to the right of this path. We can browse to an empty folder, or we can create one, and this is where we would choose that network location. Once we accept the change, all of the folders and the files that are inside of the shared folder by default will be copied up to that new location. So it's not actually moving files, it's just copying them over. And it's also going to change all of the pointers inside of Mastercam so that they are pointed to that new network location. Once you green check out of configuration, that will save all of those settings. And after that, it's a good idea to go back into the original location for the shared folder and either rename or delete that folder to make sure that it's not going to cause a problem in the future. By going into the wrong folder for something. Now that's the process for the first person that does this in a team. If you have other users who are going to do the same thing, you're most likely going to get this warning screen saying that a file already exists. Which solution you choose here is going to be a little bit dependent on your programmers and how they have things organized, how they have things named, and how much customization's been done on each system. You may need to have the programmers look into what they have their tool library named, for instance. If they have 2 different ones with the same name, that might be a conflict. So that's something to think about. Have them work with you and figuring out which files should be moved up to the network and which ones should not. Additionally, if you are installing a new version of Mastercam, maybe you've been running 2021 and now you're ready to go to 2022, you can use the migration wizard to move all of your configuration settings from older versions. The migration wizard built into Mastercam supports 3 versions back in migration. So for the current version of 2022, that's as far back as 2019. If you do have to migrate from a version that's older than that, you can contact us at support for help, and we do have some tools for helping you out with that. However, it's worth considering that if they're really old files, it may be worth just replacing them with new ones. According to our resident post expert, Alan, migrating a post from something very old, X versions or older, it may not be worth it. It could actually be easier and more effective to just get a new post instead. We may even be able to use generic posts that work fine for some older machines. So if you have questions about this, go ahead and give us a call sales, and they'll be able to figure out what's going to help you out here. So in migration, once we open that up, the first choice is basic or advanced. And we like to use the advanced option here. And this is because the advanced option gives you more control over what you're going to migrate, and in general will save you a lot of time. Additionally, if you're migrating from more than one version back, let's say you're getting 2022 now and your last version was 2020, the basic actually won't do that version, so we need to do the advanced anyways. You may end up getting a prompt on screen to save your current file if you have something open.
Hey, John, we have a question in the Q&A that maybe Jim has some insight for.
Sure.
I'll go ahead and read it out.
Yeah, please read it.
The question is, so when using a network shared folder, we recommend changing the shared folder only after installing the software and all updates. Question, are there any downsides to doing it this way rather than using a mapped drive to at install?
Okay. First, the installer doesn't support map drives, which is one of the reasons we recommended using the defaults. And you do not need to have all of the updates installed to change the shared folder location.
Excellent. Well put, Jim. Thank you. All right, so once we've entered the advanced option inside of migration, first we're going to choose where we're migrating from. And so you click on this checkbox here and then choose Browse, and you're going to go to the shared folder for whatever version you're coming from. And then our destination folder should be set up for the current shared folder location. You do have an option here to migrate the My Mastercam files, and whether or not you do this is going to be dependent on your programmers and how they tend to work. The My Mastercam files here, the things that we would be concerned about moving are things like their configuration settings for screen colors, customized right-click menus, ribbons, things like that. A lot of users are not really modifying these things, or if they are, it's to such a light degree that it's probably easier to just reset that information in the new version. So in a lot of cases, we generally have people just skip migrating the My Mastercam files entirely. It's not that much of a big deal to reset most of that stuff. It makes more sense if you have extensive edits done to right-click menus and ribbons. Once you click Next, you'll get this screen to choose what type of files you want to migrate. The first thing to do is to uncheck the box at the top, and that will deselect everything. At a minimum, we're going to need to select these 4 highlighted boxes, and maybe not even this one, depending on what kind of machines you have. But the control definitions, machine definitions, mill turn, environments, and post files. This essentially makes up what posts are in current versions of Mastercam. There are lots of other checkboxes that you may want to check, again, depending on your programmers and how they have things set up. For instance, if your shop has spent time customizing tool libraries, it's a great idea to migrate those tool libraries up so that they don't have to rebuild them. There may be hundreds of tools in there depending on the shop. Again, also, the same thing with default files, operation libraries, probing files if you do probing routines as well. That's also quite important. There is one note here that I have for these part files at the top. Since we're only talking about the shared folder, typically people are not saving the part files that we think of as part files, meaning, things we actually program with. They're not saving those in the shared folder. However, this option is here for a reason. There are tools that can be defined by profiles that are saved as MCAM part files. So if your programmers have been using that method to define tools, then you will want to make sure that part files are turned on in this list. The good news is that this is not a one-shot deal. You can run this multiple times if you miss something. So don't worry about it too much. If your programmer says something's missing, you can always go back and do it again. Typically, this screen, you can just click next. This is for migrating from specific file types, something that we do sometimes, but on the customer side, it's not very common. Once you get here, just confirm this information and click Finish. Then you'll get the pop-up for updating files. You will almost certainly get this window as well for updates and files that may be overwritten. Again, this is something where you may need to think about what you want to overwrite, but in most cases, you can simply choose update and replace original and apply all checkbox, and everything should work out just fine. Jim, did you have any notes on that?
A comment. There's really very little harm that I can see of using the option that John mentioned, that middle one for the update. Even if you wind up overwriting files in the new shared folder that maybe you didn't want to, Mastercam includes a copy of the shared folder under the program files folder for Mastercam. So we can always just retrieve that and start this process again if needed. Excellent. Thanks, Jim.
Once that has finished, you'll get this window letting you know that it's complete. It's asking if you want to see results. Most people just click no. If you click yes, this is the window that you'll get. It'll give you an idea of all the things that got migrated up. It can be useful in some circumstances, but most of the time it's pretty unnecessary. All right, so moving on. Now I want to talk a little bit more about Mastercam.com. There is an option to link your account on Mastercam.com. Linking your account simply means that you are proving to CNC Software that you have a Mastercam license that is up to date on maintenance. And when you do that, you get access to more things on Mastercam.com, such as installers for old versions, post processors, the knowledge base, tool libraries, and other stuff like that. So it's a good idea to get linked just because there's so much there that can be really beneficial to you. There are two ways you can link your account. Well, there's technically three, but I think the third way is kind of silly, so we're not going to go over that. If you are a new customer, you will get an email from us with a linking code. So you can take that right from the email and use that online to link your account. If you're an existing customer, then you will be able to generate linking codes inside of Mastercam. You can go to the File menu, down to Community, and then the top option for Link Account, and that will create this linking code. You may have to do this After you renew maintenance, especially if you fell off maintenance and then you went back onto maintenance, then that's a time that you would have to do this in order to get access to everything on Mastercam.com again. When you log in, especially if you're not linked, typically right after login, Mastercam will pop up with a window asking you to link your account. And so you can enter that code there, or you can go to your My Account page and there's a spot to enter it there as well. You can copy paste this code. Next up, we have license types and what kind of licensing is available. And we're talking about the way that your computer recognizes that you can use Mastercam, not the product levels of Mastercam. There's 4 types of licensing available. There are HASP, NetHasp, local software license, and network software license. The HASP and NetHasp are hardware options. So these are USB keys that plug into your computer to let the computer know that you can run Mastercam. This is an older technology. It is being phased out. We do have customers who are still using this, but overall, we're kind of just moving everyone towards software licensing as it's easier to work with, it's consistent to work with, and you don't have the fear of having it get broken or stolen when you're moving to a software license. So generally a good idea to go that route. If you are using a mill-turn license, it's especially a good idea because it really helps out with the mill-turn process.
I have a question, John.
Sure.
For account linking, can multiple users link to a license? For example, an IT admin and a user?
Indeed. Yes, they can.
So Jim has just answered that.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yes, that can be done by multiple people. Oh, I don't see Jim in the chat.
He responded to, I see Jim barcode to everyone. You may need to.
Oh, it just showed up.
Change your drop down for host and panelists.
I just got it.
Okay.
Yes, we'll chat about that a little bit more. If you currently have hardware licensing, you may exchange that out for software licensing. Just give us a call and we can help you out with that. The network software license option is preferred if you are using a networked style license. So if you want to manage all of your licenses from one place, we definitely prefer using that over the NetHasp. We're going to talk about that more in a bit. All the software licensing options do require you to run Mastercam 2019 or later, which used to be a higher bar, and now it's 3 years later. So I think most people have really started catching up, and this isn't as big of a deal anymore. Also, just to touch on the hierarchy of licensing, this indicates the order in which Mastercam is looking for a license. So when it boots up Mastercam, where does it look first? It will first look for a hardware HASP, then a local software license, then the network software license, then a NetHasp. If it does not find any license available, you'll get this pop-up window saying that there's no license found. Here you can enter your activation code if you're using a local software license. We ask that you do not use this page to enter codes for a network software license. It will technically work, but it's not a good idea, and we'll talk about why soon. So HASPs, again, these are the single seats where each individual USB drive runs a single computer. These are also called dongles for some reason. These are generally purple, and they have a white stripe with the license number printed on it. They come in a few different form factors. Most of them are about half-size USBs in varying shades of purple, and the light glows from inside when the drivers are installed correctly on the computer that it's plugged into. If you already have Mastercam installed, the drivers for the HASP should be installed with Mastercam. But if that's not working, you can reinstall those drivers from the drivers and utilities page of Mastercam.com. The licensed products and maintenance date are found here in the HASP-X utility. This is also installed with Mastercam. If you are needing to associate a new license, or if you're updating your maintenance, you do that with an H code file, which we will send you. And you can update those codes by either double-clicking on the H code file or using the update code button here in HASP-X. By the way, you can open HASP-X by simply opening your start menu and typing in HASP-X. It'll pop right up.
John, a comment if I may?
Yes.
On that screenshot there was taken from actually my own HASP, and the information at the bottom will likely show a little differently for users. Because I'm on a dealer HASP, there's a specific start and end date, and the expiration date, there is none. This is essentially the same thing you would, or very similar to what you would see if you were operating on a temporary license, let's say a 30-day license. You'd have this start and end date. If you're on a permanent licensing, the start and end dates would show, I don't remember what it shows, basically there is none. Unlimited, I think is what it said. And there would be a maintenance expiration date displayed here.
Yeah, good point, Jim. Sometimes it can be hard for us to show these things when we all have dealer licenses, so it's hard to get some screenshots sometimes. Here are a few links and QR codes if you're interested in any of these things. This lesson in the left here is one that Jeff did for diagnosing HASP issues, which is mostly, you plug in the HASP and it's not lighting up. Here's a video on updating your HASP codes, which Jeff also did and was hilarious. And then we have the drivers and utilities page. Once again, you'll see this one quite a bit. This one pops up a lot. I'll give you just a moment to screenshot that if you'd like. Next, we have the NetHasp. It's the same hardware dongle, but it's for networks. The difference here is that these are red with a white stripe, and they have the license number printed on them. The LED is also red, which I think was a failure in design in my mind. I don't know why you do it in the same color, but that is what it is. It does show you can see it. It will glow when the drivers are installed correctly. The difference here is that because a NetHasp is typically installed on a server, that means you don't have Mastercam installed on it. And so the drivers have to be installed separately by going to the drivers and utilities page. Again, it will show your licensed products and maintenance date in this window when you run the NHASP-X utility. So they're slightly different. They look quite similar, but they are different applications. Updating or associating your codes is done with an NH code file, again sent by us. In order to update those, you should use the Update Code File button here and then select that file. One thing that's pretty important to note about this is if you are using a NetHasp, the licensing for this must be done at the console. You cannot use the remote connection for activation with a NetHasp. This is one of the reasons that we like the software license, because it does support the remote connection activation. And then we have the software single seats or local, and we also have the network software licenses. Single seats service a single machine at once. They may be moved to a new machine as many times as needed. So if you are upgrading a workstation, you can simply deactivate it on the old workstation and then reactivate it on the new one, and you're good to go. These are recommended if you're using a single station over a HASP. And this is especially true if you're running a Milturn license, because it helps CodeMeter run a little smoother. We're going to talk about CodeMeter soon, but it's an essential part of running Milturn licensing. The network software license can service several machines. It's very similar to a HASP. There's just not any hardware. Which also the software license, there's no hardware with that. Another benefit of using the network software license is that it does support license borrowing, which is a newer feature that Mastercam rolled out, which allows a person who's working in Mastercam to check out a license for a temporary period of up to 10 days and take it with them. So they could bring a laptop in, transfer the license for a given amount of time, and then take it with them to continue working somewhere else. This can be helpful if you have people who are only on-site partial. Maybe they work a few days on-site, a few days off-site. That's one way to deal with this. The activation wizard is required to run on the machine that's acting as a server. And we did have a note on the server itself. You can run a workstation as a server, but we do prefer that we do this on a real server, or at a bare minimum, a workstation that is not really used by anyone, that can be left on and sat in a corner and not touched. And this is because if you are running a workstation as your license server and it gets turned off, then everyone loses access to Mastercam. And we've seen this bite people before, where the person who has it on their workstation, they shut down their workstation, they're on vacation for a week, and no one knows their password and they can't get into Mastercam. That's a serious problem. You can lose a lot of productivity that way. So it's better to run it on a standalone server or a workstation that is not really used. It does not take much to run the activation server. Pretty much any cheap computer that you can buy anywhere will actually do it just fine. So it's not something to worry about too much. I do see a question. Is there generally a cost difference between the different licensing types? NetHasp, software, network software?
We'd really have to talk to sales. That has changed recently. I know we're highly encouraged to promote software licensing because of the simplicity. And I know at some point there will be charges for the hardware license for those that want to stay on it. But what that pricing looks like, I'm not certain at this point.
Okay.
You'd have to reach out to sales to find out. Yeah.
So yeah, just go ahead and give us a call. We'd be happy to chat with you. I don't think if there is a pricing difference, it's probably not massive. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference on the scale of a company. So it's worth a phone call. All right, so setting up a HASP. The drivers and the HASPX utility are both installed with Mastercam. And so really all you have to do is plug in your HASP, run your licensing codes, and get started. That's really all there is to it. If you are renewing your codes for maintenance, just simply run those new H codes that we sent you, either by double-clicking or using the update code button here. Setting up a NetHasp is definitely several more steps. We're going to go over that quickly. On the server, we're going to download the NetHasp License Manager at mastercam.com on the drivers and utilities page. Alternatively, you can download this somewhere else and put it on removable media and then take it to the server. Then you'll need to extract that zip and run the exe file shown down here, the licensemanager.exe. Once you launch that, you'll get this splash screen first, and then a welcome window. And go ahead and click Next. There is an acceptance here for license agreement. Then click Install. And you're going to get this window as well, asking if you want to run this as an application or service. We do recommend using this as a service. Here you can choose where you want this to install to. And then after that, you have this window here for choosing the name of the program manager group. And this is something I'm completely unfamiliar with. Jim put a note in here that it's circa Windows 3.1. Jim, is this an important thing to talk about, or can people just leave it wherever it kind of popped up and click Next?
In most cases, I'd say just leave it alone.
Okay.
Just go with the defaults.
Sounds good. After that, you're going to get another informational screen. Just click Next. You may get a pop-up that will ask you to OK. Just go ahead and click that. And after that, you'll get this final screen saying that it has been installed. Before you choose yes and finish, make sure that you have the NetHasp plugged into the system. Additionally, you want to make sure that your firewall ports 475 and 1947, make sure that those are open. Network software licensing is easier to deal with. So all we do for this is go to the mastercam.com, go to the support page, technical support, drivers and utilities. And you can actually access this without even logging into mastercam.com, which is pretty nice. Go ahead and download the Mastercam Activation Wizard setup. Choose your language in the first screen, let it run through the second screen. Pretty simple stuff. You know, just go ahead and accept this, accept the license agreement, continue moving forward, and allow it to install. You'll get a status window here. Once that's been installed, you'll be able to find Code Meter in your Start menu. So open up Start menu, go to Code Meter, and then the Code Meter Control Center. And this is the window that pops up. From here, we're going to choose the WebAdmin button right here. And that opens up a browser window. In the browser window, we're going to go to the configuration. You can just hover over this, go to Server and Server Access. And then from the new page, we want to toggle this to Enable and click Apply. At that point, we just need to make sure that the port 22350 is open on the network. And then make sure that you make a note of the IPv4 address for the server. And this helps the workstations find the license more quickly. And that's really all it takes to set up the license broadcasting on the network. Actually activating the license, we're going to go over that in a minute, but this is the step that we need to take to broadcast that license out to the workstations. Once we have done that, we can go to the workstation, and once Mastercam has been installed, we also will get the Code Meter group. So we'll go to Code Meter Control Center, and WebAdmin once again. From here, what we do might be dependent on the size of your network. If you only have a handful of computers, it's probably not worth going through the trouble to set this up. But if you have enough computers, it's not a bad idea to set up it's not a bad idea to set this up to actually search for the specific IP address of the network server. It does perform a bit better if it just has something to point to directly. So again, in that browser tab that pops up, we're going to go to Configuration, Basic, and Server Search List. And then after we go there, it'll show this window. We can go to Add a New Server. And we're going to enter in the IP address for that server. You can also use the qualified server name, but the IP address is preferred. Then click the Apply button. And in the lower right-hand corner, there's also a little orange button you can click, and that will display a list of the servers that are currently recognized. And that's it for setting up the workstation as well. Next, we are going to talk about how to activate a software license. This process is the same for both local software licensing and network software licensing. The difference here is that if you're using a local software license, so for a single user, then you're going to want to activate that on the end user workstation. And if you're using a network software license, then you want to activate this on the server. The activation and deactivation can be done remotely for software. That's another benefit of using these software licensing types. This process can also be done online or offline. So if you have a workstation that is not connected to the internet, you do still have an option to activate that license even without internet connection. If you open up Mastercam and there's no licensing found, it will prompt for an activation code. That's the screen we saw a little while ago. If you're on a single seat, you can click yes. That will open this activation wizard. And if you click no, it simply closes. You can also find the activation wizard from the start menu under the Mastercam licensing utilities, right there. Once we get to this point, this is where we choose whether we want to use an online or offline process. We're going to go over the online process first. This is fairly simple. You do want to make sure you have that internet access stable before you do this process. So once we open the activation wizard, we're going to select the online activation / deactivation option and then activate a new license. You'll need to agree to the terms and conditions and click next. And in the next screen, this will give you the fields to enter in your license number and your activation code. The license number will be short in comparison. I think it's 6 digits preceded by a W. We'll see what happens when we run out of numbers for W. And then the activation code is, I believe, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times 4, 32 digits. And these fields do support copy paste. So if we have sent you the codes, then you can copy them right from the email and put them in here. Pro tip, if you want, you can actually save these codes to some secure location, because whenever you want to, say, update your licensing for maintenance, or maybe you got a new product, it's unlikely that your license number and activation code will actually change. They'll probably be the same one. It's good to double check in case there is a change, but in general, you won't need to. They don't change. In this screen, you can review which products are associated with that license. So that'll just be a nice list for you. Make sure that everything is correct here. That way, if you see a problem, there isn't enough licenses for whatever license you're currently activating, you can give us a call and we can get that worked out with you. Then just check the box and click next, and you'll get this screen for product activation. During this process, it may seem like this program will freeze. You'll even see this say not responding at the top. Don't worry about it. Let it run. It does take a minute sometimes, and it may look frozen, but it is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Finally, you should get the activation successful window. If you are not getting this window and you're having some kind of an issue, we would recommend trying this one more time. And if it's still not successful, then give us a call and we can help you out with that. So that is how you activate a license online. The offline process is a bit different. There's a few more steps involved because we're not directly connected to the internet. Again, we're going to open up the activation wizard, this time choosing the offline option, and then choose activate a new license. From here, you'll get the same, terms and conditions agreement. You'll have to select that and click next and enter in the license number and activation code like before. The difference is here in the next screen where we will have a prompt to save a license request file. You're going to want to save this to some kind of removable media, whether that's a USB stick or a floppy disk or whatever kind of removable media you like to use. Once you save this, you can click next and then leave this workstation as is, leave the activation wizard open, and we're going to take that removable media and go to another station that does have internet access. Once you've gone to the other workstation, you'll want to plug in that removable media and go to activate.mastercam.com. You're going to choose the first option for activate a license. And then in step 1, it's going to ask you to browse for that file. So browse to it, select it. At this point, we want to click the Upload and Verify button. It will take just a moment, and then once they've verified your license, you'll get this screen here that will show you what licenses you currently have. Again, make sure that these are all correct. Once you're confident in that screen, you can click the Download button here to get your Mastercam license file, and you'll want to save that to the removable media. Take the media back to the original workstation. This is the screen that should show up after we clicked Next on this workstation. We'll choose Finish Installing, Open on the next screen, browse to that license file, and click Next. And then you should see this screen for product activation successful. If that did not work for you, please give us a call, and we can try and help you out with that. The deactivation process is essentially the same as activation. There are clear prompts that show you the difference between activation and deactivation. If you want to deactivate online, this is also fairly straightforward. You simply choose Online and then Deactivate or Move. These are the same thing for Mastercam. It will ask you to select the license from this list. It doesn't really look like a list, so that's why I like to point this out. Just make sure you click this and then the next button will be available. Then you'll just get the confirmation screen here. You can click Next. It will again contact that server and then let you know that everything's been successfully deactivated. At this point, if you are moving this license to a new computer, you can copy these codes down, put it on some removable media, and put it over on the new computer, and then activate on the new computer. All right, so installing machines, and this is for both posts and machine environments. This has become so much easier for our customers because of the MCAM-content files. We're just going to call these content files from now on. Typically what will happen is we will send individual content files from either our customer care team or our post team, depending on what's happening and the reason for sending these out. If you are not the main point of contact, then make sure you chat with your programmers and see who is, because that's who we're going to send the files to in most cases. Once you have that from the email, you can save that to an easy to access location. Then all you have to do is open Mastercam, have a blank session, so no part file, and then drag and drop that content file from File Explorer straight into the graphics window, and everything will install on its own. This is why content files are just fantastic. They're helpful for customers. They're helpful for us when we're troubleshooting. Really like these files. There is a word of warning here, which is if you don't have your shared folder set up correctly and your pointers set up correctly, then these content files don't really work properly. So it's just another reason to say, make sure that you have everything set up correctly. And if you need any help with that, you can always call us and we're happy to assist. All right, last couple things to talk about, performance troubleshooting. And so if you're having issues with a computer running slow that you think should be running fast, or maybe you have two systems that are pretty much identical, but they have different performance, there's a few things that we can check. The first thing I want to show you is an option inside of Mastercam to show regen times. All right, so in Mastercam, if we go up to File and then Configuration, under the subgroup under Toolpath Managers, we have Display Options. And in the second column, there's a checkbox at the bottom for Toolpath Generation Time. So when you turn that on, what will happen in here is if I were to regenerate this particular toolpath, right next to the toolpath size, we'll actually see a timestamp here. So that shows how long it took to regenerate that. So you can have two workstations open the same file and regenerate and see if there's a difference between them. So that'll actually indicate to you if Mastercam's performing differently on two different computers. The other thing we can check is the multi-threading manager. So you can find that in the View tab under multi-threading in the managers. That brings up this little window. When it's not processing something, you'll have access to the settings right here. And under these settings, we can change the number of threads. And this is how many threads of your processor do you want to be using for Mastercam during multi-threaded operations. How many threads you can have is going to be dependent on what your processor is capable of. So how many cores does your processor have, and is your processor multi-thread capable or hyper-thread capable, however they like to name that. And then you can choose to put in the max number here or less. Essentially, this really helps when you have more operations or operations that have a lot of depth steps to them. That's where it really shines. But the default for this is 4, and a lot of modern processors that are running Mastercam, 4 is a pretty low number. So I've got mine set up to 8. I think I have a total of 12 threads available on this CPU, so I could turn this up, but that's just kind of where I've left it. There's also the default priority, which is set to normal by default. We recommend setting this to high instead. That will give Mastercam more priority in your system for taking those resources. Just changing those and then try to regenerate again and see if that makes a difference. It could make a very big difference. Additionally, you can check the Windows power and efficiency settings. If it's set for efficiency, then it's not going to be pushing that processor very hard and you're going to get slower Mastercam out of it. You can also check the Mastercam log to see if there's any kind of irregularities or inconsistencies. I don't know how much it's really going to help you, but it's an option. But one major thing is to make sure that you are avoiding any other CPU heavy programs at the same time. You can only split your resources so far. This is an issue that I run into pretty frequently when I'm doing presentations and I'm trying to run Mastercam, doing something difficult. I'm also trying to screen share. I'm running a camera. I'm trying to, stay connected to a web meeting. These are all things that really eat up the CPU and they end up slowing Mastercam down. We can also look at graphics screen for the GPU. Really, the only things here are making sure that your drivers are up to date and also avoiding other GPU heavy programs at the same time. What might be surprising to you is that even things like web meetings actually will take up your GPU a bit. So anything that programmers can do to avoid running other programs while running Mastercam is beneficial. So benchmarking performance. If you're interested in benchmarking your system, there is a file that we can provide you. It is called resttest2021.mcam. This will help you test for your CPU performance in Mastercam. Once you download it, go ahead and open up that file. This will require a Mil3D license, or you can get the HLE and then you can test it with the HLE. Again, it's really the same program. It's not nerfed in any way, so it's going to run just as fast as the full version of Mastercam. This file does only work for 2021 and newer. So after that, go ahead and get your stopwatch ready or your cell phone. Select all of the operations and then regenerate all and hit that hit the stopwatch. You're going to want to watch this closely. Make sure that you are stopping this at the right time when all operations have finished regenerating. Go ahead and mark that time down and do it again to see if there's a discrepancy. This may also, the discrepancy that you may see in the time can also have to do with how much RAM you have in the system. Mastercam can cache a lot of the toolpath information so that it doesn't have to reprocess everything if nothing has changed. If you find that the time is shorter, then you may have a good amount of RAM in there. If it's about the same, then you may want to consider getting more RAM for your system. These are some generalized results over here. If you have a time of less than 3 minutes for regenerating all of those operations, you're in pretty good shape. That's a well-performing system. Based on the forum that I've read, a time of 2:35 is about as fast as anyone's really been able to do. If you're somewhere between 3 and 4.5 minutes, that's not bad. If you are a person doing kind of more standard programming, you're probably okay. But if this is someone who's doing large, complex parts, assemblies, multiple machines, many operations all in one file, it's definitely time to consider an upgrade to a stronger CPU. If you are over the 4.5 minute mark, and you spend any amount of time programming during the day, then it's definitely time to consider an upgrade, whether that's by individual parts or getting a whole new system. Looking for faster CPU, more RAM, maybe even cooling, depending on whether or not throttling is an issue. So make sure you're checking temps as well to see if throttling is actually the cause of your issues. And then the last thing to talk about here is the GPU performance. This is a tougher thing to really quantify because there's no direct measurement for GPU. The best thing you can really do is run some kind of simulation and check to see how smooth it is. And how smooth it is going to be something that's, it's a little more subjective, I guess. But, ultimately, if you're trying to run something that's not terribly difficult and it's still acting pretty chunky in verify or simulation, that could indicate that your GPU is not really up to snuff. This is kind of a test of both CPU and GPU because, they always are working together in this sort of circumstance, but having a low-power GPU does hinder this test a bit. Finally, onboard graphics. Like we said at the beginning of this whole presentation, they're not supported. And the reason for this is that onboard graphics will struggle in simulation, and that's if it even runs. It may not work at all. We've seen issues with this, and this is why we always check with our customers who are having issues with this sort of thing. First thing we ask is, do you have a discrete graphics card? Because it's very important for Mastercam.
I just wanted to see if you maybe mentioned not using the migration utility to migrate the actual Mastercam.mcam files.
Yeah, we can chat about that. Let's see if I can find the correct slide for this. Oh boy. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so in the migration, we kind of chatted about this a little bit. We talked about migrating these shared files, but not the My Mastercam files. And again, one of the reasons for this is that for the most part, what's in the My Mastercam files is stuff that is easy to change, things like screen color. And it's not generally worth the effort to go through all the steps here. But the other reason for this is if people are saving their files into the default locations, as opposed to putting it somewhere on a network, maybe they have everything organized by customer or by order number or whatever. If they're saving it to their standard location, that's default in Mastercam, what happens is that if you allow it to migrate the part files, they will open every single one of those files just to save it again in 2022 or whatever your current version is, and then close it and then open the next file and again and again and again. If you have hundreds of part files in there, this could take a really long time. And that's why we generally don't do it. Mastercam is capable of simply opening an older version, and then once it's been opened, you can save it, and now it's in the current version. So there's really no benefit to migrating part files from an older version to a new one using the migration wizard. Again, the reason that the part files checkbox is available in this list is because custom tools may be defined by a profile that's saved in a MCAM file, which would be considered a part file. And so if you are using those to determine the profile of a custom tool, you would want to migrate that. But if they are saved as a custom tool, they should be saved in the shared Mastercam folder, not the My Mastercam folder. So that's it can seem a little confusing because, you know, both locations may have part files, but we're okay with migrating part files from the shared folder for the purpose of custom tools. Generally unnecessary and a waste of time to migrate part files that we actually program from in the My Mastercam folder.
Perfect. Thank you, John.
And a note on that, if you migrate all of the part files, they're going to overwrite the original files and you won't be able to work with them anymore in the previous versions. Whereas if you do them on a one-by-one basis, you have the option to save those files off somewhere else.
True. But why would you want to go back, Jim? The current version is definitely the better version.
I agree, but there are cases where people want to have access to the previous version still.
Yeah. I love 2022 as a release. It's so solid. I mean, everything's worked so well. The toolpaths are great. I love the new toolpaths. They're just fantastic. This is one of my favorite releases.